Well, good evening, my brothers and sisters and brothers. And I just want to say, oh boy, how happy I am to be here, first of all, with you. And I apologize for being so late. You know, my dad was in the military, 25 years, retired lieutenant colonel, and I pride myself on being on time because he used, as a military man and coming from a military family, like being on time was the thing you do. But had a flat tire, was upper north at the Capitol, upper northwest. Then with the rain, then it was challenging, but I had to get here, and I want to thank you all for remaining. It really inspires me.
Such
And
a beautiful woman, John.
thank Jeannie and
Should see
all of
her.
my
Come see
constituents,
her.
everyone in the Bay Area, whether you're here or
Represents the
there.
Bay
I
Area,
want
you
to
know.
thank you all for your trust, your support, and your love over the years. And again, I always say this to my congressional district, and it's in large part due to our
If you
Friends
want to hear,
Committee,
I'll take my
it's the most
earbuds off, but you
progressive, the
don't,
most
right?
enlightened, the most diverse congressional district in the country. And I want to salute my congressional district and thank you so much for leading the way. The North Star, my district is the North Star for peace and justice. Couple of things, let me just say very quickly. This, you talked about the AUMF, and if it weren't for you, I don't know where we would be right now, because immediately you got it, and the cover that you provided for me spiritually, emotionally, physically was what helped me continue to fight. There were very few organizations which understood that 60-word authorization to use military force was overly broad, and it gave any president, and I mean any president, the authorization to go to war in perpetuity. I mean, that's basically what it said. And so there was no way that I could vote for that, first of all, because it was wrong. And I know that, of course, violence begets violence, but understand that this was a terrible moment in our country. We had never been hit by a terrorist attack. And it was very personal also for me because my district director's cousin was Wanda Green, and she was the flight attendant on Flight 93. And I'm sitting in the Capitol on 9/11 and had to evacuate around 8:30 in the morning, being told a plane might be coming into the Capitol. Lo and behold, the plane that went down, and I'll always remember this, Flight 93, Wanda was on that plane. And those heroes and sheroes probably saved my life. And so I'm sharing this with you because it was very personal also to me, aside from the fact that I knew that this was a moment that we had to come together and figure out what the heck was going on and do something, but not give any president the authorization to go to war. I knew that. And so, yes, the vote was very difficult, but what happened was I talked to my predecessor, Ron Dellums. Many of you may remember. I know from my district, you remember Ron. And I worked for Ron for 11 years. Ron never, ever told me how to vote, but he always gave me the pros and cons. And in this instance, I called Ron. We went through, I'm a psychiatric social worker by profession. So was Ron. All right. And he reminded me, he just said, when people are in mourning, when they're grieving, when there's fear, you don't make decisions like this. You don't make hard decisions that could affect the future of the planet. And we have to evaluate that and know that the country's in mourning, which I said on the floor. And let's take some time and figure out what the response should be. But rather than that, there was this rush to war. I was very reflective on what was going on. Do you remember Marcus Raskin, IPS, any of you? Well, IPS, I called Marcus Raskin. We talked. I talked to my pastor and my mother and father, and my dad was the first one that called me after I voted against the authorization. Said that was the right vote. My military dad, my lieutenant colonel dad, who made me salute him toward the end of his death. He was in the 92nd Battalion in Italy during the Normandy invasion. And my dad was a patriot like you would not believe. And he called me and he said, that was the right post. Don't you back down. And so I had that kind of support, and all hell broke loose. Of course, the death threats, the meanness, the hate. Rudy Giuliani was the mayor of New York, and of course, I had an opponent then. She went to New York for Veterans Day, led the parade with the sign "Barbara Lee hates America" and my smiling and the World Trade Towers in the background burning, being called a traitor, all the ugly stuff. Okay. And when I went back finally to Mills College, my alma mater, first time I traveled after a few weeks because of the security issues, I couldn't even get on a plane. I walked into the auditorium, and this is where Barbara Lee Speaks for Me started. I walked into this auditorium of about 750, 1,000 students, primarily women. This was a women's college. And there, all the students just started yelling, "Barbara Lee Speaks for Me." And that's how that started. Young people. It was young people. It was young students who got it. Okay, and so yes, and I want to thank you again for helping us get close to repealing. We're still working on this. The Iraq authorization, I've talked to Tony Blinken, the president. We've got a letter going over there. Again, he can proclaim, because the mission has ended, the end of that authorization. So there's still, this year, we're working on it. So continue with what you're doing, because your help and your advocacy and your clarity really has shifted the dynamics in Congress. And with the 2001, we're close, but I don't think we'll get there this year. There are other issues. But on Iraq, if we get that done, and we've made so much progress, but 20 years, persistent perseverance, right? To get this far. This is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So just keep at this. With regard to the Pentagon budget, let me tell you, before, yes, I worked for Ron Dellums, and so Ron was the first African American to chair the Armed Services Committee, and he taught me a lot about Pentagon spending. So when I came to Congress, I took a deep dive on it. I said, wait a minute, the Pentagon has never been audited. The only federal agency that has never been audited. Okay, so I went to a Republican. I said, we need to introduce legislation to require the Pentagon to be audited. So we got that done. We were able to work this through some bills and include that in, I think, one of our National Defense Authorization Acts. So Pentagon finally was required to conduct an audit. Okay. To this day, the Pentagon has flunked 6 audits. And I've talked to General Austin about this, and they know it. So you talk about waste, fraud, and abuse. You talk about scamming the taxpayers. You talk about allowing these weapons and arms dealers to take your tax money to build missiles and bombs and do research that is probably outdated anyway. We've identified, and I've worked with Bernie on this, at least 150 billion that's just waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, imagine 150 billion being able to build more schools, more clinics, and invest in our climate initiatives, invest in housing, invest in the quality of life that our veterans deserve and our military officers and personnel deserve. So come on. So we started with Mark Pocan, who's a great leader on these issues, the Defense Reduction Spending Caucus. And so we introduce legislation every year to an amendment to cut $100 billion. That's nothing. This defense budget's will be $1 trillion pretty soon this year. And so we've gotten, and thanks to you, more votes than most think we get, probably 90 to 95 votes. Now, it takes 218, right? So you see, we have a long way to go, but at least that debate has started. At least it's on the radar. At least the public is beginning to see why we have to have a defense budget, yes, that's going to protect our national security, that's going to be strong, but that's not going to be excessive and taking away from domestic needs and giving your taxpayer dollars for wars. And so we're going to have to keep at that until we get a defense budget that's sustainable, because it's not sustainable now. It's and I also thank you for recognizing that peace and justice go hand in hand. I was involved, and I don't know, any of you remember the Sane Freeze movement and the peace movement of the day? Well, we were nuclear weapons, or nuclear weapons, an equal opportunity destroyer, and so we've got to rid the world of nuclear weapons. Any country that has them, including our own, needs to rid the world of them. And so we were on the floor last night talking about that. But when you talk about, you know, peace and justice, during the Sane Freeze movement, during the peace movement, there was also a civil rights movement going on. But you never had the peace movement and the civil rights movement come together, because we would have been much further along if that had happened. But now what I see, thanks to you, you understand the reason that peace and justice have to be part of one movement. And so I would encourage you to continue to work with the justice groups, the groups who are fighting for human rights and for civil rights and for gender equality and for LGBTQ plus rights, because all of these issues intersect. And Friends Committee on Legislation, FCLN, you all always have gotten it in terms of your agenda and the vision and the lens that you see our policies and our priorities in this country. There are, and I chaired when we were in the leadership, Democrats, the committee that funds all of our non-defense programs. Humanitarian assistance, yes, UNRWA, UNESCO, we negotiated a return into UNRWA, which now is disaster. More resources into the Palestinian Authority. We fought for making sure there's some accountability measures, and the politics of the Middle East, and we fought and got as much as we could get to make sure that we could help lead toward a two-state solution and keep this country on track in terms of what we do. We also were able to invest more in the Caribbean and in Africa and more into development and diplomacy. Okay, and that was the committee I chaired. And I was really proud of the fact we were able to increase our budget when I was chairing. Now it's been cut back to 2010 levels, but the three legs of the stool of our national security, development, diplomacy, and defense. My budget was pretty high for this committee on development and diplomacy. It was over about 60 billion. Defense was 840 billion. Now you see how out of balance this is? And so what we have to do is fight for a new national security foreign policy that brings some kind of rebalancing. Because if we don't, we'll never see peace in the world and peace in our own country. And so we have a large job to do. And I'm not really retiring. I'm just forging ahead into this next chapter of my life. So I'm going to be at it with you. And I want to take a moment to thank Gregory Adams on my staff, who's my LEDS director, who you all know, who Team Lead, once a member of Team Lead, always a member of Team Lead. Gregory has been phenomenal, and I know you know him. And, he's going to still continue to be an advocate, a policy person, someone who works the politics and the policy on Capitol Hill. And so just know that we're going to move ahead. And we can't forget that this is a marathon, that peace and justice has to be the order of the day, because otherwise the planet will burn, our young people won't have a future, we'll be constantly in the midst of some war somewhere in the world, and we'll never have a future that our children and grandchildren so deserve. And it's all up to us. And so thank you for this beautiful compass. It is just very special and unique, as you are friends. And I have to just salute the Sisters of Loretta. I don't know if anything you know about the nuns, but they taught me as a child in Catholic school. Little did I know their values were those of peace and justice and community service. I just didn't like them because they made me diagram sentences and take logic and all that other side. I just didn't like them. But as an adult now, I realize where I got a lot of what I'm doing from, and that's from the Sisters of Loretta. So thank you again.